Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Brittany, whenever you're ready, Brittany, feel free to get started.
Okay. Hi, everyone. As Jessica said, I'm Brittany Newberry. I'm a processing archivist at the Atlanta University Center in Atlanta, Georgia. There, I'm responsible for managing the ArchivesSpace instance we have in the archives. I develop workflows, create manuals, do trainings for staff. I'm also a former member and chair of the ArchivesSpace User Advisory Council and an ArchivesSpace trainer. So we're going to get started here by going over the application itself, going over these general command areas. So this is the ArchivesSpace homepage of the staff interface. From this homepage, you can do various things, create your records, browse records, that kind of thing. So we're going to go over the general command areas. Over here is where you would select a repository. So in ArchivesSpace, you can have multiple repositories, like you can have multiple physical repositories at your institution. So you can create in your implementation multiple repositories. And if you have the ability to work in more than one, you would be able to select different ones from this drop-down menu and then change your repository. What you see throughout this training would be a system administrator level permissions. And I just wanted to point out that depending on the type of permissions group you are in, the things you see on drop downs will be different. So if you don't want people to be able to have access to multiple repositories, you can change that. And I recommend checking out that in the Help Center. The drop down next to it is your systems drop down. This is where you can go to your controlled values list, container profiles, location profiles. You manage your repositories and you manage your users from this list. You also have access to the ArchivesSpace Help Center. We're going to go over several of these functions in a way throughout this, but others you may want to look into if you're interested in later in the Help Center documentation, if you're an ArchivesSpace member. Next to it is the name of the user you are. So we're admin, but you have the ability to change what kind of user you are from this drop down. If you want to see what a specific user in your implementation has access to, you can become that user by going here, the ability to log out. And this is where you would control your preferences, the global preferences for the whole implementation, the repository preferences for this specific repository, and then your preferences as a user. We will be going over this a little bit in the 4th day of this training. Whenever you see a question mark, that means you have access to the ArchivesSpace Help Center there. You can click it and it will take you to that wiki, so you can go through the manual and just search through it for whatever you have questions about. I recommend using that whenever necessary. So below that command area is where you would see what repository you're currently in. So it just gives you the abbreviation for it. And if you were to hover over it, you could see the full name. You can click on it and see information about it. Then you get the settings gear drop down. From there, you have more access to managing the users of your repository, such as the groups they're in, and this refers to the permission group, their access, attributes for assessments, which we will not be going over, but we will be having assessment training next year. And if you're interested in assessment, I recommend checking out that training. You can manage your top containers, which we will be going over in day 2 of this session. You can transfer stuff to different repositories, do background jobs, go to reports, and you can see the one plugin that comes out of the box with ArchivesSpace, which is the Library of Congress Name Authority Files import, which we will be going over later on when we talk about agents in day, I believe, 3. So that's that command area. As you move to the left, you'll see that there's a search bar, and this search bar allows you to search throughout this ArchivesSpace implementation repository, and you're able to do advanced searches. You can choose a Boolean operator when available is not. You can search by keyword, identifier, various other things, and you can continue to create advanced searches based on text, date, Boolean, that kind of thing. And that just allows you to search for various things within your repository. So if we were to just type in a word and just hit search, it would take you and show you if there are any results for that. If there's anything. So we typed in test, and this is the search results we get, and it tells you the record type, the title of that record, what it's found in, meaning the record or it's found in, identifier, date, and then you're able to view and edit that record. You'll see that the default is to sort by relevance, but you can change that to created by, modify, record type, title, and identifier. You also, the default is to show up to 10 results. You can change that in the config file, but we won't be going over that today or during this training. You can also see on the side here, you can filter more. You can add more text to filter it by. You can choose a different record type depending on what ones are available. You can choose a creator, subject, even language of materials to filter your results and narrow them down. If you were to go into a record, you can either view it or edit it. View mode is the record without it in edit mode. So it only shows what's been completed for that record. So you'll see on the side various sub-records like languages and such. And we'll be going over this stuff more in depth when we get to these different record types. You'll see different buttons at the top, and depending on your permissions level, tells you what kind of buttons at the top of this menu see, such as suppress and delete. And as you scroll through, you just see the different data added to that record, and you're able to view it. If you wanted to edit this, you would just click edit here. And it would open up the record in edit mode. As you work in a record, you'll notice that as you scroll over records, you get this handy tooltips box, and these are throughout the application, and they usually tell you information about the field. So this is a required field, and it's based on DAX, and it gives you examples of this title. And you can see that with various other elements within this. So basically, most everything in ArchivesSpace will have this tooltip, and these are configurable in the config file, but we won't be going over that either. If you see a red asterisk, it means it's a required field. If you see something that has a grayed out asterisk, it means it's conditionally required. It's either this or something else within that record that is required. And as we get to those different types of sub-records, we'll discuss that more. If you are in notes, you have the ability to add text within it. You have the ability to also add tags. So as you start typing, you can see the tags appear. And it'll give you options within it. You can also use tags that you are aware of. And you can italicize, add emphasis, add dates, language, that kind of thing in your notes field. I want to go over here. In certain boxes, you have the ability to expand them. So this field right here, this repository, you can expand, make it wider just to be able to see the text better, that kind of thing. If it's a very long note and you want to see it, you can do that. Going over everything generally. Okay, so I wanted to quickly show you the browse menu. So after search, there is these two other drop-down menus. There's create, where you have the ability to create various records. So anything above this line is unique to your repository. And if you create it in this repository, it will not appear in other repositories. Anything below this line, such as subjects and agents, are created for the whole implementation. So you wouldn't create the same subject twice in different repositories. You'd create it in one, and it would be available to all the repositories in your ArchivesSpace implementation. Through the browse menu, you see the same thing, but you're able to click on the, and you can see all the accessions, all the resources. It does limit to 10. If there was more than 10, you would have multiple pages. You have the ability to edit default values, download CSV, create an accession from this menu, and also delete them from here, depending on your permissions level. You can filter your results. Let's see if resources better. So you can filter your results by text. You can filter by subject type, and you have the ability to view and edit from browse as well. You don't see the found in like you do in searching, but you can also within preferences change your what columns appear within your browse list, and we'll go over that later. You can change how it's sorted, as well as doing a faceted sort. So you can do title ascending and created by or identifier, that kind of thing. You can also ask that it show components by just checking this box. Once you do that, it will show the components for the resource records, and we'll get into more what these archival objects mean later on. So at the bottom of your screen, wherever you are in ArchivesSpace, you'll see this information. So this will take you to the public interface, and this shows you what version you are using. We're using 3.1. So if you click on View Public Interface, that will take us to this public interface. This is the out-of-the-box ArchivesSpace public interface. So this is the general home screen, which has a search bar similar to the staff interface, but just more user-friendly. They have the ability to limit their searches, as well as search by different fields, and add advanced searches with all the Boolean operators of and, or not. You'll see the different repositories within an implementation, and when you click on them, you're able to see the various records it contains. So you'll know what's in a specific repository. The whole public interface allows people to search all the repositories that have public records. So whenever you're in ArchivesSpace and you see a public question mark checkbox, when you check that box, it allows it to be viewable in the public interface. You can see all the collections in it, as well as digital materials, which refers to your digital object records, which we will be discussing on day 3. Unprocessed refers to your accession records. So if you choose to publish your accession records, they would appear under the unprocessed tab, and they will become searchable in the ArchivesSpace interface. Subjects or subject names refer to your agents, so your people names and your organizations. And then records groups refer to classification, and people are able to browse to all the things that are public. You can customize this, but we won't be going over that. I'll quickly show you collection records. So when you're in a collection record, you have 3 tabs to choose from: collection overview, collection organization, and container inventory. You'll see at the collection overview, at the top level of a collection, the ability to request a citation by clicking on this. Print, which will generate a PDF of the finding aid, and then staff only, which will take you back to the staff interface. You do have the ability to turn on a request button, but that is not on by default. You can see the collection organization on the side, be able to search through the collection and see various records and information associated with the finding aid. And collection organization just takes you through the whole scrolling finding aid. And container inventory just lists all the containers associated with the collection. And if you want to get back to staff and be able to edit this, you would just click staff only. It would open up a new tab and take you directly into that record so you can edit it. I'm going to change back to the repository we were first in. Okay. I do want to point out that throughout ArchivesSpace, if something is good, it gives you green. If you get an error message, you will get red. And let me show you what that does. If it's red, it means you got an error message. So if we were to delete this identifier and save, you would get a red error message, and then it will tell you what is the error. If you have multiple, it will list them. If you click on it, it will take you to that area where you have the error and highlight it so you can fix it. So you can save the record. I just want to make up the number. And once you have fixed the error, it will give you that green is good. I recommend saving early and saving often. So to save, you just have to fill out all required fields for a record and then pressing save. It doesn't have to be the completed version. It just has to be something where you can save it, because if you walk away from your computer and haven't saved something, ArchivesSpace will log you out. It's generally the default is 60 minutes. So if you go to lunch for an hour and come back and haven't saved your work, you will lose it. So we recommend saving so you don't run into the problem of it logging you out. And with that, I believe I've covered most everything with the application overview, and I just wanted to take questions before we move on to accession records.
All right, thanks, Brittany. All right, so we do have some questions in the chat. I think that Malaka may be answering some of them as text. So there's some, keep an eye on the Q&A if you've asked a question, or even if you haven't asked a question, because there's going to be some good info there from the trainers. But let's go ahead and answer some of these questions in the Q&A. One thing that Malaka did respond to already, a question about the repository processing note, whether or not that is not published. And like Malaka said, it's not included in any exports or reports either. It would be viewable to anyone else in the staff user interface though. So do keep that in mind. It wouldn't be specific only to you. Other coworkers could see it. Noraline asks, can you have more than 10 records show at a time in a search? Is there a setting to increase that number? There is. You can do that in your config file. You would need to talk to your sysadmin or the person that manages your ArchivesSpace implementation to change that, and they could increase that. It would be across system-wide, so you could increase it to whatever number you wanted, but do keep in mind to keep it manageable. You don't want to increase it to like 500 probably. You still want it to be a manageable amount on the screen.
Yes.
Eleni asks a really good question. Does resource record, does that mean finding aid?
Yes. Whenever ArchivesSpace, for a majority of people, resource record will refer to a finding aid. But some people, you know, may have individual items or small collections or something, and resource records are good for those as well. So it just refers to a collection, and for most people, that is a finding aid.
And that will start to make more sense as we look at resource records today and on Wednesday, building out that hierarchy. To follow up on what you just said, Brittany, so was that the collection level that you just showed?
Yes, the one where I was editing to show the error message, that was the top level collection level. Mm-hmm. But that can be a different level depending on if you do individual items or that kind of thing. It's really wherever you start your collection.
Yeah, and we'll look at that and how to build out that hierarchy on Wednesday. But today we'll just be looking at collection level resource records after the break. Claire asks, is there a way to switch between the public and staff interface without losing the collection you're working in? When you were moving back and forth, Brittany, you went back to the Welcome to ArchivesSpace home screen. Could you maybe show how to view a resource record in the public user interface and then move back?
I don't know, I would open up a new tab. For us, our ArchivesSpace public interface has a completely different URL from our staff interface. But if you're like editing one in here and you click like staff only, it will take you to that record specifically, and it's a whole new tab. So you can still go back to where it is in the public interface as well as where it is in the staff interface. If you're going from staff to public, my recommendation is opening up a new tab. There might be another way, but I don't do that generally. Sorry.
It's also possible if you're in the staff side to select view
Oh,
published.
yeah, sorry. So if we were to go, you can view or edit. I'm in a different repository than I usually am. So these top tabs, the view published, will open up a new tab for that specific record so you can see what it looks like. I don't know why I forgot about that.
It's just one of those things, you do it so often, you take it for granted. Paige asks, how does the system identify unprocessed material? What data does it use to determine that it is not processed? Paige, I think Paige is referring to the unprocessed materials tab in the public user interface. Those are accession records. So if you create an accession record in the staff user interface and publish it, it will be discoverable in the public user interface under the unprocessed materials tab. If you would prefer not to call them unprocessed materials in the public user interface, you could change that to something else. Or if you don't want to make your accession records discoverable to the public, you could hide that tab entirely. If that doesn't answer the question, Paige, let us know. Ryan asks, is there an overall limit to the number of resource records that ArchivesSpace can have? No, or if the limit exists, no one's found it yet. And people have created a lot. You may, it's just the amount of dedicated space on your server. You may have some performance issues and just have to increase your space. But yeah, you can create as many resource records as you need. We are all caught up in the Q&A, it looks like.
Awesome.
All right. So I think unless I'm talking slowly, so unless anything else pops up in the Q&A, I think we can go ahead and move over to Accession records.
Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to create accession records, which are generally for your unprocessed materials, the same your acquisitions that you get. You may want to consider creating these as a way of recording that information to, create intellectual control over it. So ArchivesSpace gives you the ability to do that. You can go to create and click accessions, or you can browse your accessions and create an accession from that browse list. So we're going to click accessions here. So this appears is a blank accession record for a new accession. I want to point out the only required field for an accession record is the identifier. These identifiers must be unique for all accession records in your repository. So, but if you have multiple repositories, you may have similar identifiers in others. But in this repository, it must be unique, and there's no worry about it being the same as other repositories because those records are only for this repository. So based on your institutional policy for creating accession record identifiers, you would fill this out. It can be numbers, it can be letters. You have 4 fields here that you can fill out. So if you do yours based on date, say it's 2021, and this is your first accession of the year, you can do that. If you assign a number to all your records and it stays with it through its whole life, you can assign it to this accession, and it doesn't have to be unique for the resource record. So that number can stay with it for its whole life in ArchivesSpace, basically, and in your repository, in your institution. So to save the accession record, you just click save. And like I said, save early and save often. So once you added the required information, I would say save it and then go through adding the other information you would like to have. So within the basic information subrecord, there's a lot of information that you can add. So you can add a title. So we're going to say that these are the Jane Doe papers. If you were to get this acquisition at a different date and you wanted to change the accession date, you could. You can go backwards in time. You can go forward in time. The default is the day you are creating the record, but this is up to you and how you do it in your institution, what your policy and procedures are. You can publish from here. So you can check the publish box, and this would publish it on the public user interface. If you don't want it published, you would just leave this unchecked, and the default is to have it unchecked. Content description refers to the type of material, so like your scope and contents note, that are in the acquisition. So what does this collection have? So this collection contains correspondence, I can't spell today, research materials, writing, photographs, to the life and career of Jane Doe. I will point out that ArchivesSpace doesn't necessarily have spell check. Some of these fields will give you a red line, but it depends on the field. I happen to have my Grammarly extension on, and that's what you're seeing with the green. So that is a completely different extension that you can have with Google Chrome, which is what I'm using. So if you were using that and you wanted ArchivesSpace to do grammar and spell check, I would recommend adding the Grammarly extension, but that's completely outside of what ArchivesSpace does. Condition description refers to what preservation and conservation concerns you have for those collections. Like, is there mold damage? Is this something you see when it comes in? Is it in horrible condition, like the boxes are falling apart and it needs to be rehoused, that kind of thing. So you would write that here if you wanted to make note of that. As basic preservation concerns. Rusted staples and paper clips. You can say that photographs need to be rehoused. Yeah. And whatever you would like to say in terms of condition. The disposition is another note that you can add. So if you were to separate out materials, like if you keep your AV and that's completely different collection, if oversized become a different collection, you can say that you've separated out materials here. If there's an inventory, you can list that here. You'll also see later on that there's ability to add external documents. For the inventory here, this can be like the tooltip shows. You can just have box 1, diaries, box 2, letters, and it can be just a general inventory. But if you've created a whole Word document and you want to link to that or want to make note of its location, you can either write the location here or you can add it as an external document. So provenance is what it says. It's about that custodial history. Who did this come from? Who created these records? That kind of thing. So you can add the person, so like donated by Jane Doe or donated by the family of Jane Doe, that kind of thing. So we know that the records were created by her, but we acquired them from the family. Retention rule, if this is part of a retention rule, maybe for your university records, your institutional records, that kind of thing, you can add that here. And general note is just to cover anything that we wasn't covered with any of the other note fields or any of the other sub-records that are a part of this accession record. So if you want to make note of, you'll be getting additions regularly for this collection, you can add that here. Anything you think you need to add, you can do so here if you don't think it's covered in any of the other fields. Acquisition type refers to what type it is. Is it a deposit for, is it a regular deposit of a collection that you keep getting, like university records? Is it a gift from a donor, a purchase that you made, like a manuscript collection, or a transfer from a different department, that kind of thing. So you're able to choose that from that drop-down menu. Resource type refers to the type of a collection it is. So if it's manuscript, papers, and it's papers. If it's print and published materials, it can be publications. If it's your organizational records, you can include records. If it's an artificial collection that's been put together, that's not necessarily came that way, or you decided that this should all be a collection, you can choose collection. So it's really, like most things, it's up to how you think it's what you think this type of collection is. Generally, if you call something papers, it's a manuscript collection. You would choose a type of language of description. So you can type ahead here. So you can choose English, or you can scroll through all of them and choose. When typing in English, the current default is Old English, but I don't know why, but that is what it is. You can choose a script of description, so whatever script this language is written in, so English would be Latin, that kind of thing. If there are restrictions on this collection, like it can't be used or accessed for like 10 years or whatever the access or use restrictions are, you can check that here. And then if you want to add a note for either access or use restrictions, you can do so, and you can check these as well. If you do this and you publish it, then these kind of restriction notes will appear in the public user interface. So you researchers will see that there are restrictions. Like if you want people to see your accession records and be able to request them, but they're not necessarily open for research without a valid reason, like for a thesis or a dissertation, you can have an access restriction and write it here. If there's copyright issues or something like that, if you don't, they can't be photocopied, you can add a use restriction. So you have the ability to add language. The language is similar to a language of description. There's what's required for this is the language, but script is not required. Whenever you're in a record and you start opening up sub-records, different parts of that record become required. And so they'll start showing with the red asterisk or the conditional requirements. You can add a language note explaining maybe this has multiple languages and you want to note that there's writings in French and English. You can add a note here. And you can add multiple languages if this collection is in multiple languages. You can add dates. So if you add a date, you either add expressions. So if this was 1900, 1990, and you choose inclusive. If you don't have an expression, you must add an begin and end date. So it's either or for those. And it usually explains that when you. So we can add this here. Expression is human readable. So people viewing this on the public side or in the staff interface can read that quite easily and know it means 1900 to 1990. But begin and end dates are machine readable. So that way, when people search, these cover all those dates, not just 1900 and 1990. It's going to cover all of the dates in between 1900 and 1990. So keep that in mind when you're determining how to best use dates. And you can always use both. You can add an extent. So say this collection is 10 linear feet. What's required is always a number and the type. And within it, you can add container summaries. Say there's like 10 document boxes or 10 legal size boxes or 10 of those regular cartons, that kind of thing. It depends on whatever you call it. You can add physical details and dimensions about the boxes, physical details. There are wine boxes. that kind of thing. Agent links. So agent links are good to link it to maybe the donor of the collection or a person associated with it. So you can choose a role, such as the creator, and then just look for them in it. And if they're not there, you can create them, but we're not going to do that now. That is a different whole other part of this training. If you've already created resource records and accession records that are related to this collection, say this is an addition and you've already processed the materials you got before this, so you want to make sure it's associated with that resource record, you can add that here. If it's an addition to an already received accession and you want to make sure you keep all of those related, you can add an accession record. And that allows you to choose the relationship type. Is it part of this collection or is it a sibling to? Like say it's family papers and you have various accession records for the different family members and you just want to make sure it's noted in ArchivesSpace that they're related. You can do that here. And you can add multiple related accessions and resources. You can add subjects, which we'll discuss how to create those later. External documents, here is where you may want to consider adding the inventory and naming it here. And then if it's like a PDF, you can add that file path, or you can add an actual URI. Ideally, ArchivesSpace would prefer if you add a resolvable URI, so that URL to wherever it lives. So the file path, the server where the PDF lives, your digital materials, wherever you have that information. But if not, you can simply say that it's on Brittany's desk. Hopefully it's not, but if that's where you know where it is, you can say that here, or you can say it's on the archives drive or on our drive, whatever. And you can actually publish external documents separately. So if you publish the basic information, it won't publish external documents unless you choose to have them published. So if it is a resolvable URI and you want people to be able to access that, they can click on it and discover that inventory or whatever, maybe the donor agreement, related correspondence, that kind of thing. It is not, when you're in the public interface, these external documents are not keyword searchable within the ArchivesSpace public interface. If they open it up and it's a PDF, they can probably use Control F, but if they were to search within the public interface, this external document is not going to, the data in the external document is not going to appear as a part of the search. And I just wanted to make you all aware of that. You can add rights statements, metadata rights declarations, which is a new part of this. And I'm not going to go into it because I'm not very certain of what it is, but it's based on DAC standards. You can add instances, which we'll go over tomorrow what those are. You can also add the accessions. If you've received this collection and you already know that you need to, you've already found duplicates, maybe during your inventory, and you want to make sure you only keep 2 copies, or you found damaged materials that are not something you can keep within the collection, it's just not something you can save, you can add that here. It only requires you to say what portion of the collection is being deaccessioned, so it can be part or whole, and just give a description. You also have the ability to give a reason, the disposition of it, like you returned it to family or it went in the trash, whatever, but that's not required, so you don't need to necessarily put that. You can also give, say if you notified the donor or whoever of the accession, or if maybe you're required to notify your supervisor, you can check that here. It also allows you to give a deaccession date. So you have an option to add the expression, or add the begin and end date similar to other dates. And then it defaults the label of deaccession. So that way you know when the deaccession happened. And then if you really want to get super granular and you're required to add extents, you can do that here and add an extent to it. So this really can be really good for the accession records if you have do a lot of the deaccessioning early on. It can also be good for resource records later on to do a deaccession. That way, if you have that type of information and you keep it regardless, you can also keep that information in ArchivesSpace. You also have the ability to add collection management fields, and this usually refers to the processing of this collection. So what's the priority for it? Is it high, low, medium? Have you determined the rights? Do you have a processing plan? Do you know the people processing it? You can add the hours, which is usually in numbers, and with decimals, you can add the extent and extent type. So you can add the estimate of hours as well as the total processing hours it takes. And then you can also, if this is being funded by a grant or a donor, you can add that funding source. And then you can also add the status, like is this in progress, a new collection to process, or is it completed? So none of this is required unless you add the extent, and then you need to add the extent type. But it's great field for just managing your collections. If you do this with majority of your accessions, it can give you the ability to see the various stages of your processing. And then you can add classifications, which are just those record groups. And then there's these handy user-defined fields for really anything you need to add. And it gives you ability to add these various things and edit them, that kind of thing. We don't really use them, but if you're interested in them, I would recommend checking out the user manual. Okay, so once we filled out all that we wanted to fill out, we will save the accession record. So once you've saved it and you've gotten your green good to go, you can see that there's not a lot more you can do with an accession record. There are events you can add, which we won't be going over. You can transfer it to another repository. Say you created this accession record in the wrong repository and actually a collection belongs to a different one. You can do that. You can calculate extent, create the assessment, or you can suppress and delete it. Additionally, you have the ability to spawn your accession record into either another accession record. Say there's an addition and you want to just have the same information and then have a different identifier. You can do that and add more information, because not all fields spawn. For more information on what spawns, you can check out the user manual, but it's just some of the fields and not all, depending on if you spawn to accession or if you spawn to a resource. So you're ready to start creating a finding aid and you want some of the information from the accession record to spawn to a resource record. You would choose resource record, would open up a new resource record. It would have the same title, the same resource type, the same language, even the same date, which you can edit if you determine that the dates are not those or there's more dates to it. It will even spawn notes. So it will spawn the content description as a scope and contents note with the label content description, but you can edit that. And physical description is what condition description becomes, and you can edit the label for that, which we'll get into this more after the break, like all the resource record components. And it will also add a related accession. So you will be able to have a link to the related accession, and that accession would also have a link to the related resource once this is saved. But it doesn't, as you can see, I don't know if we added anything. It did not add the external document, so that did not spawn, even though we had one. It's not associated with this resource record. And it did not have the identifier. Let me go back up there. Identifier and that kind of thing. So not everything spawns. It really just depends on what you filled out. And then you aren't able to save this immediately. You actually have to go through and add all the required elements before saving it, which we'll get into everything associated with resource record after the break. And let me go back. So we're going to leave this. and go back to accession records. So that wasn't saved, so it's not actually resource record in the repository because we didn't finish filling it out. So you won't be able to find it, but we still have our accession record. And I wanted to just pause here to take any questions we may have.
All right, thanks, Brittany. Okay. So we do have some unanswered questions in the chat, and then Malaka and I have been answering some questions via text. So again, make sure you're checking out that answered question field. So if you asked a question and we aren't able to get to it, it's answered. It's answered via text. So make sure you keep an eye on that. Melinda asks, going back to when you were creating identifiers, how can you determine what number you are up to and how many you have accessioned for that year? So identifiers, that's something that you would determine how you want to set your identifiers locally. So that's an internal practice decision for you. Maybe people on in this training could type into the chat how they determine their identifiers or how they set their accession identifiers for the year, or if Brittany or Malaka want to offer any insight. But the identifier is just something that is a number that you would create and just maintain that standard as an internal practice.
Yeah. We actually keep a spreadsheet of our log for our fiscal year, so we know what new acquisitions we received. We keep a spreadsheet of our collection numbers, so we know what number we're up to and we add to it every time. Also, if you reuse one, it will tell you. So you'll get that red error message. So that way you'll know that you've used that one already.
Yeah, we have a clipboard in our mailroom where they're assigned as soon as they come in. But if you're like really speedy quick and get your accession records into ArchivesSpace like same day-ish, one of the filters when you do a browse on accessions is the accession date. So if your first number is the date, then at least you only have to look through that year's accessions to figure out what number you're on.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Dean asks, can you hide the provenance note from public access?
I would recommend not writing in it.
Yeah, you can, if you elect to publish your accession records, if you publish them and you put something in that provenance note, it's going to be publicly viewable. Like Brittany said, don't put anything there that you don't want publicly, or don't publish your accession records. You know, it's up to you whether or not you make a practice of publishing your accession records or not. I know that many organizations do not. They opt to include sort of limited resource records instead, and just don't make their accession records discoverable for that reason. There might be some information there you just don't want people to see. Dean says, thanks. We've had problem collectors trolling our donors.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I want to follow up on that, but we got to move on. All right. Jenny asks, my previous institution used Atom instead of ArchivesSpace and only used a spreadsheet to record accessions as they came in. So when creating an accession record in ArchivesSpace, do you then, however many years later, transition that to an arrangement record finding aid, or is the arrangement record created as new and the accession record linked to it? There's a lot there, Jenny. So I'm going to answer some of it, and then I'll let Brittany take the rest. So first, I will say that if you have a spreadsheet, and this is not just for Jenny, if you have a spreadsheet of your accession records and you're looking to import your accession records into ArchivesSpace, there is a CSV template to get your accession records into ArchivesSpace as CSV. It's on the migration tools and data mapping page of our website, and that is linked at the bottom of your agenda. I'll put it in, Jenny, I'll put that as an answer to your question in just a second, but you can use that that spreadsheet template to import all of your accession records into ArchivesSpace. So that's a way to maybe do that job a little bit easier than having to create individual accession records. And then once you have created those accession records, you can always elect to spawn them into resource records and link them, or just create new resource records as you go and link the accession records after the fact. But that sort of builds on Kara's question, who is also asking about importing records. She asks, do all collections need to have accession records before they can have resource records? And the answer is no. So to both Jenny and Kara, if your workflow is fine now for accession records and you'd prefer not to create accession records first, you don't have to. You don't have to have an accession record to have a corresponding resource record in ArchivesSpace. But before I dive more into Kara's question, Brittany, do you have anything to add to Jenny's question or issue?
Yeah, so I recommend that importer, but also if these collections are like physically accessible for users, you may want to just go ahead and start creating resource records, which there is like CSV importer for that, but you have to, we'll go over it later. So there are ways to get that information in quickly as a resource record too, depending on what type of information it is. I also, when in terms of like accession records, it's really dependent on if you as an institution process your collections quickly and you don't have a large backlog, which good for you. If you, what kind of intellectual control do you want over your collection? Do these sit on your shelf before being processed and you want to make sure you have some information on there? You may want to create accession records. So that way you just have that intellectual control over the collection and you know the condition and content, and it may help you determine processing priority, and making them public may help you determine that priority too, because if you keep getting questions about the collection, it can help you determine the process it sooner rather than later. So really you don't have to do accession records. It just helps if you have that backlog to have the information about those collections.
Thanks, Brittany. And I think that that gets into Kara's question as well about do you have to have the accession records at all, and then do our records go to accession section first and then are dispersed? You don't necessarily have to even create the accession records. If you do create accession records, you do either need to create resource records and link them, or use the spawning feature that Brittany showed.
Yeah.
If
any of those records that are listed on the create menu can be created separately from each other, except for like assessment has to have a record associated with it. Right. But most everything else can be created separately.
You have to have something to assess, but yeah, that's why. Yeah. Elizabeth asks, can you clarify the difference between an access and a use restriction?
Yeah. So access restrictions just refer to what restrictions you have on accessing the materials, like what are they able to view and what's open for research. So if there are fragile items that people can't view, then that would be an access restriction. If there's something that's personal, like financial materials that can't be viewed, so they can't access it during their appointment, that's what access restriction refers to. Use restriction more refers to how can they use the materials after accessing them. So can they make photocopies? Can they use it in a film, in a published work, that kind of thing. For us, we have unpublished manuscripts, and people are allowed to look at them, but they can't take photos or photocopy them, that kind of thing. So I hope that clarifies those restrictions.
Thanks, Brittany. Yeah. And these map to the conditions governing access note and the conditions governing use note in resource records. So these map directly to those note fields, and those are decks. Those come from decks. Yeah. Yeah. And Elizabeth says, "Yep, thanks so much." Done. All right. Another good question. If you type the date in the expression field, will the system be able to search that date, or do you need to use the begin and end date fields for machine readable dates?
Machine readable are begin and end. Expression is human readable. So if you want the machine to be able to read it, especially on the public side, use begin and end. And that will help people when they're limiting their searches by date.
ArchivesSpace is keyword searchable. So,
Yes.
you know, if you do put in 1900, you'll pull up anything that has it anywhere in the record. But if you actually, you know, want to go, I want all the records from 1900, you need to put it in the begin and end fields.
Yeah. And if you want 1901, this record wouldn't come up without the begin and end date.
And the date expression, like Brittany said, that's human readable. So it could say 1900-ish and it would save. So sometimes those date expressions can be pretty creative.
Yeah.
Will the retention end date be the same as the deaccession date if you have a preset retention schedule?
That's up to you. So you can, there are two different subrecords, or the accession is its own subrecord, and then retention rule is a part of the basic information. So based on your your institutional policy, you would determine those dates, and you can add them in both places. So this is just a free text field for retention rule.
Yeah. Thanks. Does the collection management field spawn to a resource record?
I don't believe so. It may. I don't use it regularly.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Okay.
The collection management in a session record only applies to what you did in the accession record. That way, new data is put in the resource record because you've reboxed everything and all that stuff. So the notes are different.
Yes. But you do have the option to do collection management, right, at the resource record.
All right. Can you make the collection description from the accession record into an abstract field instead of the scope and content note if you're spawning? Oh, go for it. Sorry.
It spawns into scope and content, but you're able to either change the label to abstract or copy that and add a note that's for abstract. So you can do it two different ways.
All right. Is there a provenance note field in the resource record?
That's a good question. I have not. Is that a note option?
I was about to go look. There are like 26 note options. If there isn't a note that corresponds like exactly to provenance like you want, you could always use the general note and change the label.
Yes, but the provenance from here does not spawn into a resource record.
Yeah.
You usually, a great way to do provenance in a resource record is to add that agent link for the creator or source of the material.
Yeah, that's a great point. My institution has a number of legacy collections that we can't find any paperwork for. I feel that. There are basic finding aids, not much else. So we don't have accession dates. Can we use circa dates? We can generally tell about the decade when the collection was processed.
So accession date is not required, so you can leave this blank. And then in general note, you can add a circa date saying like, we believe this accession was acquired circa whatever, like whatever you want to add in that general note you can, because dates, the date subrecord refers to the dates of the materials. Just FYI.
Yeah, that's a very common problem, and that's why accession date is not required. It was required in earlier versions of ArchivesSpace, so it may be that you're using an older version where accession date is still required, but if you update ArchivesSpace, that requirement will go away. Is there a way to export the accession records into CSV or other structured data formats?
You can do reports on accession records.
Yeah, you can run, there are several different reports that you can run on accession records. And then if you go to the browse accession records screen, you can, yeah, Brittany's going now. You can download a CSV there of all of your accession records, but because there is no like standardized format for accession records, like with resource records, you can export it as EAD or export it as mark XML, but there is no standard like that for accession record. So you can't export that for an accession record. Is there a note? Oh, this is a good question. Is there a note for Accession records like Provenance or something, but it's private, internal, available to staff only? There is a note that does not publish within Accessions, and I'll let Brittany show you.
You're gonna have to tell me which one it is.
Oh, sorry. I'm trying to scroll down on your own screen. The scroll back up. It's not general note. I'll look it up and I'll put it in the chat. There is a note that doesn't publish, unless Malaka knows it off the top of her head.
Nope.
Okay. All right. I'll find it. All right. I think we're all caught up in the Q&A. Again, some of them were answered in text. So if your question wasn't answered, it is answered in the chat. All right, I think we're all good. Brittany, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, well, that was everything with accession records. Let's see. Yeah, that's all I have. So is there, but because I think the next thing is a break. If anyone has any questions about accession or the application overview, we can do that as well now. Or just can send us a break.
I'm pausing to see if anything else pops up.
We can wait until you find the answer to the note.
I'll find that in the break and let everyone know. I'm looking through the answered questions to see if there's anything to clarify there before we go to break. There were a couple questions about languages, so it's probably worth pointing out that the language is you're talking about the language for the materials being described. So that was a question that was asked, and there was a question about the languages from the drop down menu. Those are an ISO standard, so that drop down list is not customizable. Those are pulled from a standardized list, but some drop downs are customizable, and as we're going throughout this training, we'll be sure to mention that if it's a customizable list or not.
Yeah, like your extent drop down here is customizable. It will also import ones from like imported materials. So that's why we have like 2 linear feet here and all this other information. Like those came from somewhere or were added to the controlled value list. And then I will point out that you can default your languages and pre-populate them, which we will discuss on day 4, hopefully.
Sounds good. All right, or something in the chat. Oh, yeah, and Lee points out that collection management field is internal as well. So any information you put in collection management is going to be internal. But I swear there's another note, but I will look into it. There's a question about distinguishing between photographs and scrapbooks, and that question may get answered as we're looking at creating resource records. So I'm going to go ahead and move that question over because I think it may get answered later, or the answer may become clear later. If we don't have any other questions coming up in the chat, we'll go ahead and take a 15-minute break now, a little bit early. So let's go ahead and break for 15 minutes and we'll come back at 30 minutes after the hour. If you have any questions in the meantime or anything pops into your head during the break, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A and we'll address it when we come back. But otherwise, let's take a 15-minute break. Thanks, everybody. We are going to go ahead and switch over to talking about resource records. Malaka Kottman is going to be doing that for us. Doesn't look like we have any new questions in the Q&A. So we are good to go. Malaka sharing her screen. All right, Malaka, are you ready? Malaka, are you there? You're muted.
No, but you know, that window pops down
I
for only
know.
half a second. It's like, dang it.
It's really aggravating. All right, we'll go ahead and take it away.
For those following along in their workbook, we're going to be on page 49 to start out with, and then we're going to jump all over the place, but at least that's a good starting point. Resource records, we're going to do a single level. The bulk of you, you didn't know it, but you use multi-level, so don't get ahead of yourselves. That'll be tomorrow. So within the context of ArchivesSpace, resource records are defined as materials that are in the custody of an archival repository and are being controlled according to archival principles. Each resource has a unique identity, such as a resource, i.e. collection or item identifier, or a title. An archival resource may be comprised of one item or an aggregate of items that can be of any extent or complexity. ArchivesSpace supports description of the archival resource as an intellectual entity and also as one of more physical entities that may embody the intellectual item. The description of the archival resource can be supplemented with context and content descriptors, otherwise known as names and subjects. So there are 3 ways to get a resource record into ArchivesSpace. Create one from scratch, spawn from an Accession record, which Brittany showed you already, but we'll quickly go over some of that again eventually. And then you could also import a finding aid or a mark XML record that would then create the resource record in ArchivesSpace. I'm going to show you how to create one from scratch. So let's do that. All you have to do, obviously, is click on Create. And then you choose resource and you get this lovely template. Since I haven't saved it, all new resources get this title here that says new resource. There are 4 or 5, there are several, let's say there's several required fields in a resource record. There are 3 in the basic information section: title, identifier, and level of description. The languages is required, dates are required, there's extents that are required, and then down here, the language of description of the finding aid is required. So all of those are required. So let's fill those in first. Like the Assession records, you have Toolkit Tooltips, and these actually refer to chapters in DAX, so that you could look up the guidelines that they supply if you're interested. We'll put in a title, Papers of Melvina Williams. This one's from my own collection. It's a small one. The identifier must be unique. If it's not unique, it will yell at you and give you that lovely pink warning. So you might want to ensure that there's a way to come up with a unique number in the system for each of your resources. We use call numbers, obviously. That's probably what a lot of people do. And our call number will be RH for regional history, and then MS for manuscripts. And then it's just a straight accession number, so it's 1,296. You actually have 4 boxes, and you could feel free to use all 4 boxes. If you use the public user interface display, I believe it puts periods between those. If you put something here and here and here, it would have a period in between each one. So be aware of that. The level of description is required. This is a drop-down list. And since this is the primary record, the collection level record, I'm going to use that as my level of description. Other fields in the basic information field that you could fill out would be resource type. So if you wanted to collect everything that's papers together, you could fill that out, or publications or records. This is actually a list that you can add to, so feel free to add your own resource types. I'm going to leave it blank. Publish, just like the Accession record, if you have a check mark in here, it would publish to the public user interface. Right now, since we're just working on the record, we don't want people to see it yet. We're going to leave it unchecked. If there are restrictions to this collection, either use or access, I would recommend putting a check mark here. It doesn't make a difference if you don't put a check mark and then you say, oh, nobody's allowed to see this collection ever, ever, ever. The world's not going to end. But if you ever want to use some of the system reports in ArchivesSpace, those will not be pulled up. So that's the main reason you might want to use the restrictions apply checkmark box. The repository processing note, again, is for notes that are just seen by staff using ArchivesSpace. It won't be published in the public user interface, even if you have this publish button checked. Language is required. And as Brittany said, at the last session, you'll learn how to pre-populate this. But for now, we're going to just do a type ahead of English and never, never, never just hit the first one. So it's that second one. I'm going to go ahead and fill in script, which is Latin. Again, that's another one that has variants. So make sure you pick the right one. Dates. You got label. I'm going to make mine a creation date, but there are other kinds of dates that you may want to include in your record. And here is a list of them. I believe you could add even more of your own kind of dates if you really, really want to, but I think they've done a good job of figuring out what dates people normally use and include them in the default package. Expression, you'll notice, has a gray asterisk. That means it's required if. So an expression is required if you don't have the normalized dates. This is what I've always thought was weird. It goes label, expression, and type, but you have to fill in type before the other dates. So I would have put it as dates, type, and then expression and begin and end, but nobody asked me. I'm going to fill in the beginning dates of, oops, let me scroll down because I don't remember what they are. Oh, 1882. 1882. I'm going to do just years, but you could do years dash month, or you could do a 4-digit year, 2-digit month, and 2-digit day if you want. And here I'm going to do 2012 as when the thing expired. I'm lazy. And so since this is only years of begin and end, there's no reason to fill out expression because it will display the same in the public user interface. Now, if I had done September 1882, I would have done 1882-09. It has to be a 2-digit date. And then in the expression, since that's for the humans, so they don't have to count up on their fingers what the 9th month is, I would actually type in September 1882 to 2012. So that's how we use expressions at our institution. We'll only use them if there's dates besides years involved. You have certainty, so if you're totally certain, you don't have to fill it out, but you could say approximate, inferred, or questionable if you're guessing at some of this information. There's era and calendar. Nobody really uses those, but they do have them. Extents. Since we are at the collection level of the record, I'm going to leave this at whole, but there are other portions. You could say that that this information only applies to part of the record. The number here, it has to be an ordinal number, so it can't be like, well, it doesn't have to be an ordinal number. Well, yeah, it does. So, so this is a measurement. So you're not going to say 8 cubic feet. I mean, you're not going to say a cubic feet. You're going to put a number here. So I'm going to say that it's 5.5. You can do decimals. You do have this drop down box. And so I'm going to say linear feet of material. Container summary is optional. You don't have to fill this out. So if 5.5 linear feet says it for you, that's great. If not, you could actually put in a summary of like 6 boxes, 3 oversized boxes, and 1 audio cassette. Now I put all that together, but I could enter another extent note that's just for the audio cassette, for example, if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. Physical details, these are great for photographs. We use it for, sometimes we put things that, like those manuscripts that some are yay big and some are a little bit bigger and have stuff falling out. So we'll put physical details there also about it. And then here's dimensions if you wanted to add it. You'll notice that these boxes have the little lines on the corner. That means you can make them bigger or smaller as you desire. And then finding aid data. The only two fields required here are the language of description and the script of description. Since I only am fluent in English, I do know Spanish, but I'm not fluent in it. This finding aid is definitely going to be in English, so I'm going to type ahead and get that. And the script again is going to be Latin. So that's all you need to fill out for the finding aid. However, if you want to use any of the nifty cool features like the spreadsheet importing, I recommend at the very least putting in an EAD ID. And this could be any format of numbers and text that you want. Just make sure that it's unique to your repository. And so we always do KSRL for Kansas Spencer Research Library. And then we do the last name of the person. So what was her name? Williams, right? Yes. So we do that, and then we do Williams, and then we do their first name. And if needed, we do their last name, and then we do, well, actually, we don't do XML. That's only when we export it. So that would be our EAD ID. Obviously, you would come up with your own way to ensure things are unique. The EAD location is generated from the resource. It's either a URL or a file directory statement. At my institution, we use handles from a server, a HandleNet server. And so that would be what our EAD location is. And I don't think that I copied mine. Yeah, so I'm going to leave it blank, but if you have handles for your collections, feel free to put that in as the location. The finding aid title is, the finding aid title is the title for the finding aid itself, not the resource. So that's why this is register the collection inventory list of, so this would be papers of Melvina Williams. Also, and the finding aid subtitles, oh, ours is actually guide to the papers of Melvina Williams is the finding aid title, whereas the subtitle would be what matches the actual title. So the finding aid filing title, if everything's called papers of or photographs of, everything's going to be in the P's. So you kind of don't want things filed that way if you were going to print off everything. So here's where you could put either you could do like Williams Melvina so that it's filing under the last name, or you could have just done Melvina Williams papers of sort of thing. Finding a date would be the date you created it, 2021 0-10. It's the 18th. It's almost. Finding an author. Again, this is a text field. You could put the person's full name if you want, or we use initials to sort of kind of make it anonymous because we do let this information show to the public, but we certainly don't want our students to get called later on about it. So we have an internal list of what all our initials mean, but we don't actually put down, oh, please blame so-and-so for all this information out there. The description rules is a drop-down list. They got ACR2, CCO, DAX, And they have DAX twice. We're going to just use that first one. We already filled out the required fields here of language of description, etc. And we have additional fields that can be filled out, like sponsor and edition statement, series statement, finding aid status. That information may prove helpful. And so there is a drop-down list. It's editable, so you could add whatever you want. So if it's completed, like the whole thing's done, if it's in progress, which is what it is now, or if it was completed once and now you're working on it again, so that's under revision. I'm going to put it's in progress for now. And then you have a finding aid note. So this is for any other information that you couldn't figure out where else to put it about the finding aid that you could stick here. Revision statements. We won't need this obviously because this is a brand new resource record, but if we were working on an existing one, you have the ability to record a revision date and a description, for example, of what you did to change it. And you could decide whether or not you wanted this published in the public interface or not. I'm going to go ahead and remove it. To remove something, you just click on that X and then you click on confirm removal. Related accessions, you could manually link to an existing accession record here, but we don't have an accession record for this particular collection, so we won't do that at this time. I'll show you how to do it at the next record. Agent links and subject links, I'll show you more about those when we learn about agents and subjects, but as Brittany explained, anytime you open up any of these subrecords, there will be additional required fields. So here you would have a role and an agents that has to be created. Record. And so for the role on this one, since it's the Melvina Williams papers, my guess is she's the creator. So I'm going to say creator as the role. When you have creator as a role, you also have this additional field of title where you could add King Lear after William Shakespeare. Obviously, I'm not going to do that. You have an optional field where, and it's supplied from yet another ISO standard, a list of what this person is. So like if they were the bookseller, etc., or just the author, then you could put that in. And then agents, you could type ahead here, STUMP. I know there's a stump person. Nope, no stumps today. Or you could browse, which will take you here, and you could find a person to add. Let's add Brad Westbrook just because we can. And then we go, oh no, that's not right. To delete an agent that you accidentally added, you just click on this lovely blue X here and it should go away. Yay. You could also create one from scratch, either a person, family, corporate entity, or software. But like I said, I'm not really going to create one now. So I'm going to just click on that and confirm removal. We have notes. We have a lot of notes, lots of notes. So you're going to drop down of note type. And here are all the notes you could possibly add. We're going to add immediate source of acquisitions note. Persistent ID is something that ArchivesSpace will supply for you, which is what I recommend doing. But if you're into all that machine stuff where you need to supply it yourself so that this links up with that, then feel free to mess with it. I figure if you know what you're doing, go ahead and fill it out. A label. This is not a required field, but this note is going to display with the heading as immediate source of acquisitions, unless in this label field, I put something else. So somebody asked about provenance. Let's say I want to actually make this provenance instead of immediate source of acquisition. So it's still that type of notes, but instead of immediate source of acquisition being bolded in the display, it'll now say provenance. So we're going to put here gift of Susan Doe. The Doe family is very popular. External documents. You can attach external documents just like you can in the accession records if you desire. I don't desire, so I'm not going to add them. Rights statements. Oh, let's add some more notes, and then I'll talk about rights statements. Let's add, and you notice the note comes in after, so after that initial note. So here's an abstract. Always good to have abstracts. This collection is about, oh, well, this collection contains, probably better, contains genealogical information about the Williams family. Another way to add a note is down here, because why would you want to keep scrolling all the way up here? When you're way down here, you could click on this that says add note, and we will add conditions governing access. Conditions governing access has additional information that you could add. You could add a date when the restriction begins and a date when the restriction ends if you want. You could choose what kind of restriction from this drop down here. Well, it's not really a drop down. So if you prefer any of those, I'm not going to have any restrictions. So this collection is open to the public. And then another way you could add notes is if you hover, oh no, I guess not, you have to click on add note here. There used to be a plus sign, I swear. Another note, let's see, related materials. See other stuff at LC. So I have all these notes and they look nifty cool, but I want to rearrange the order so that abstract displays first in the list. And I could do that by, you see these things that look like hamburgers? Well, it's called hamburger. It's 3 little lines that are gray. If you grab it, it turns into a 4-way cross. And if you drag it, you could move it up or down. Yeah. So I'm going to add, so conditions governing access has now been moved all the way to the top. Abstract is second and immediate source of acquisition is third. So you could rearrange the order that way. Now you saw that there were rights statements in the regular notes. There's also a rights statement area, which I believe there's a whole class on that could be offered one of these days. There has been a session on this before. I'm sure we get enough requests, there'll be more sessions on it. And so if you wanted to fill out this sort of thing, you have drop down, and based on what you choose, you get more required fields. You have to put in a citation. Citation here, jurisdiction. You get a choice. We're going to put United States here. The start date is required. We'll put October 4th. You could add notes, acts, external documents, and agent links to this also if you want. I'm going to go ahead and, well, I'll leave it. Metadata rights declaration. More information about this can be found in DAX 8.2 and 1311. This is where a lot of people now are putting in Creative Commons rights information into their finding aids. And this is where you could add that information with the URL with URI to whatever right that you want, the Creative Commons license that you want to link out to. I'm not going to have that, so I'm going to remove that. Instances we'll come back to in a minute. Deaccessions. There was a deaccessions area in an accession record, And that area only applies to if you are deaccessioning something when it's in still being accessioned, hasn't had a resource record. Now let's say we've actually created a resource record and then we come back and go, oh, let's remove boxes 12 and 13. That is where you would indicate that information here on the deaccessions on the resource record. Collection management has all sorts of interesting things that you could make use of. Processing priority, high, medium, low. Again, this is a customizable list. So if you want like sort of high and medium low, you could add those as sections if you want. Rights determined processing plan. This is where it's always helpful for our curators. Well, they actually do it on the accession record, but they write notes in the processing plan. The processors, you could add their names here. None of this information in the collection management area will display in the public user interface, even if you select publish all. So you could go ahead and actually spell out the processor's full names at this point. Processing hours and unit estimate, you could put that information in this record so that when that student leaves or goes home for the weekend, you don't have to guess how long it took to actually process that collection, because it'll stay with the record forever and ever and ever if you want. Processing total extent or extent type, those are required ifs. So if one is filled, a numerical expression for the total extent needs to be filled out. And if you fill that out, then you also need to do the type so that it knows what the 5 means. Total processing hours, funding source, processing status, completed, in progress, and new. I believe, yeah, I'm not sure which one of these the reports pull from, if it's this or the finding aid status. But one of these statuses here and here is used in the system supplied reports to generate reports on whether things are completed or not, which makes sense. I'd have to do experimenting. Yes, do you know?
Can I interrupt you?
Yes.
So actually the report on processing status is pulled from an event record, whether or
An
not
event record. Oh, that's right. Okay,
yeah,
good.
whether or not a collection has a processing event attached or a cataloging event attached. So
Okay.
it's not pulled from that processing status. It's a super common misconception. So I wanted to interrupt you.
Well, when I started, they didn't have the event records. Classifications is similar to the subjects and agents. And so I will barely gloss over that when I talk about the agents and subjects tomorrow or the next day, whatever day it is. User-defined fields. These, just like the accession records right now, they don't have any labels. You'll have to do some in-house customization to actually have them be labels, but this is Boolean means true or false, yes or no, whatever you want it to mean. An integer means it has to be a whole number. Real means it could be a decimal. Dates obviously are dates. String is a short text string, whereas text 1 can be longer. So I'm not sure what the limit is, but I do know there is a limit. If you keep typing on the string field, eventually it will just stop typing. Whereas if you do text, you could go for quite a while. And then controlled values, you could come up with in the customizations, you could actually add some drop downs to this if you want. So let me close that because I don't want it. Confirm removal. Okay. So I'm finished with this record and I could save the resource. And I filled in all the fields correctly, yay! Which is why I have this green here. But let's say I wanted to add an additional note field. So I click here and I click on add note. Let's do scope and contents. And then I'm going to leave the content blank, even though it's a required field. When I click on save resource, I get this pink thing that says property is required but missing, and it's in the content. And you're like, where is that? Everything has content. If you click on it, you used to be able to Yeah, not anymore. Jeez, every time we get a new version. So it's not there. It's pink here, so you know that this is where the content was missing. And contents. So now we have that. And it lets me save it. So that's how you create a resource record. Let's go back to instance. Like I said, most cases you're going to have series, you're going to have archival objects. But in this case, I only have boxes 1 through 6, and I don't want to do any further description of these items. So I'm going to go ahead and just add a container instance now for that those boxes. So I'm going to click on add container instance. Type is required, and that's a drop down list. So I always use mixed materials when I don't know any better. Top container. If there was containers already attached to this record, we'll learn more about what top containers mean in another session. That'll be Brittany's favorite job. I could search here and add it, but since one doesn't exist, I'm going to create it. So I click on create, and I'm going to do a container type of box, and the indicator is going to be 1-6, and I'm going to create and link. Ta-da! So now I have an instance saved on this record, and you could see now that it says Papers of Melvina Williams, collection, mixed materials 1 through 6. You could expand this area if you want, but there's nothing there. So there's a resource record. It does not have an accession record, but let's go to a resource record. And wow. Let's do the Wayward family papers just because. Okay, so this does not have a related accession record. From a resource record, if you have one that's already existing and you come in later to create an accession, or you had an accession and you didn't remember you had an accession, you could come in here, click on add related accession. I'm going to do a browse, and let's link it to Jane Doe. And so I linked it to Jane Doe, linked to accessions, and now it's nifty colored blue. So let's save the resource. And then here where it says related accessions, it now says 1 because there's one thing linked. It's blue, which means I could click here and choose view. And we see the Jane Doe papers in a separate tab, which is always helpful. So that's how you link an existing resource to an accession record. I think that's about it. Are there any questions, comments, concerns?
There are some questions. No concerns yet, but we'll see.
The day's young.
Yeah, exactly. There were some questions that got answered. Brittany answered some, and I answered some. And I may touch back on some of those in just a second, but we have 2 open questions. Dean asks, so for an agent, if that agent is a subject, just confirming that they're still an agent, they're just their creator is subject, correct?
Well, here on this record, we have some that are subject. So here's a person who is a subject. So the role is subject. And here that same person is also the creator. But this is all one single agent record. So you don't actually have to create multiple records. The beauty of linking.
Yeah, and we'll cover agents and subjects on day 3, I think. But the important thing to take away from that is that if a person is a subject, they are still an agent record in ArchivesSpace. They are not a subject record.
They're not a subject. They just have a role of subject.
Yeah, exactly. Save yourself some heartache down the road. And data cleanup, which is the same thing as heartache as far as I'm concerned. Another question, we also use We use handle to link the EAD. You mentioned handle to be registered in EAD location field. A handle is also a persistent ID. Should we register the handle here again?
The persistent ID is something to do with the API jumping around stuff that they do. And so it's not the same as a handle. So the persistent identifier is so that if you have that number, you could have your API go in and jump to that spot in the record, I believe. Whereas a handle is, you know, you change servers, and of course, every last web address you have changes. But if you have a handle, you only have to change it on one side and not 50 million other places.
Thanks. Another question that Brittany did answer, but I think it's worth me reading the question and the answer because it comes up a lot. Can the identifier field in a resource record be the same as the identifier in an accession record? And Brittany did answer it. She said, yes, they can be the same. It just has to be a different identifier from the other resource records.
Correct. When you spawn a record, the identifier does not come over because it assumes you're going to want to use something else besides, you know, a session kind of number, but you are more than welcome to use an accession ID, the same as the accession ID if you want.
All right. We're all caught up with open questions. Everything else has been answered in the Q&A text, so be sure to check that out. Malaka, is there anything else you wanted to cover?
No, I don't think so. The single level is really, really easy.
It is. Well, it's easier.
Easier. Well, yeah.
But we wanted to make sure you covered everything that you wanted to cover. We do these trainings, we schedule them for 2.5 hours because we know they take more than 2, but they don't always take the full 2.5. So we're able to get a little bit of time back today. So that's great. Brittany, anything that you want to add before I start doing our wrap up notes?
No, I think we're good.
All right, we're good. All right. Thanks everybody for a good first day. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we do include some exercises for you to complete between sessions. So there are 2 exercises that are available to you to complete. The first exercise is to create an accession record. That's on page 48 of your workbook. And then the second exercise is to create a single level resource record like Malaka did today. That's on page 62 of your workbook. You can jump ahead if you want and try to build out some hierarchy in your resource records, but we don't anticipate you doing that or knowing how to do that. We're going to go over that on Wednesday, creating that hierarchy. So please do take some time and do those exercises if you can. It'll help reinforce what we covered today. And if you are able to do the exercises and have some questions, or even if you aren't able to do the exercises and tomorrow a thought comes into your mind and you want some clarification, please do use that form that's included on your agenda to submit questions in advance. You can also ask them on the fly when we see each other again on Wednesday, but if you ask them in advance, it does help us sort of dig into them to make sure we're giving you good, complete answers. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap up and give you a little bit of time back. I will see you at the next training, which will be Wednesday at the same time. Use the same connection information provided to you via Zoom to get there. Big thanks to Malaka and Brittany for doing this training on a Monday and being with us for the next 2 weeks. And I look forward to seeing you all on Wednesday. Bye, everyone.
Bye.